Well, hello and welcome. Welcome to another episode of the Imperfect Men's Club podcast. My name is Mark Aylward, and I'm here today with my good friend, colleague, and co-host Jim Gurley. And today we had a pretty lively pregame. It seems, Jim, like the politics of the world are fodder for topics. We're not really hurting for topics. We try not to talk about the same stuff, but it's so crazy out there. What we decided on today was one of our selves, the center of our wheel being the self, and all the words that Jim's helped us come up with over the last year or so, self this, self that. Today we're going to talk about self vulnerability, the notion of opening yourself up to criticism and risk. And both of us have had recent experience with that. I suppose it's something, Jim, if you strive in life, you're always putting yourself out there in different ways, shapes, and forms. And sometimes, from my perspective, it feels very vulnerable. And then other times, I suppose I'm not even sure that I'm exposing myself to vulnerability. I'm being ignorant about that. So I'm interested to hear your thoughts. This is, to me, it's a fascinating topic.
Yeah. Uh, yeah, I'm just not sure everyone puts himself out there. Not everybody um, welcomes self vulnerability. I do think it's something you're striving to accomplish something or do something. You're willing to expose yourself to that. But yeah, the reason I decided to pick this is it checks a lot of boxes, particularly the center of these five areas of our life. And the center, we always start off with self awareness. This could be maybe number two, because one is self awareness, just being self aware of what's going on in your life and the people around you in those five areas: our profession, our health, mental health, physical health, our finances, our worldview, and with others. So we'll start off with the five W's, right? What is self vulnerability? Why does it matter? Who does it affect? When does it apply? And where in your life? I think what is it? I'll let you read the the definition, my Google definition of self awareness. But why does it matter? Because um, it's I'll share my experiences this past week. You're along the way with me. When you're pushing yourself, you're going to be vulnerable. You're going to push yourself out there, and it could be humiliating. It also can be rewarding, depending on how it turns out. But I do think it's something that makes us better if you're willing to take the risk. But yeah, Mark, why don't you start off with the definition of self vulnerability?
Yeah, thanks. It's always helpful to read the definition. I appreciate you providing it. So,
Yeah.
self vulnerability is about being open and honest with yourself about your own feelings, thoughts, and experiences, both positive and negative. When you're honest with yourself, you can develop a deeper understanding of who you are, what you value, and what you need to thrive. This self awareness can lead to greater self acceptance, stronger relationships, and a more fulfilling life. It involves acknowledging your strengths and weaknesses, your successes and failures, and accepting all aspects of yourself without judgment. Self vulnerability can be challenging, but it can also be incredibly liberating and empowering. That's a great definition.
Yeah, I think so. It start off with involves acknowledging your strengths and weaknesses. Strengths are easy, right?
Hmm.
But your weaknesses, that's not easy to acknowledge or to realize that you've maybe pushing yourself to the limit, and now you're either going to have to ask for some help or you're going to have to work on those failures if you want to go to that next place that you're trying to get to. And so yeah, there's some other five examples. We'll go through those, but I think with full disclosure, I'll share my story, and of course, I'm sure you've got some as well. Um, I was preparing for a talk I'm doing for the National Kitchen Bath Association, and it's public speaking that comes doesn't come naturally, but I do okay in real life, right? I can get through a talk and make it entertaining, and it does okay, but this particular project was a webinar, so I had to stare at a screen as I was trying to share this 40 minutes of information. And I tell you, I really struggled. And I struggled to the point where I started almost panicking, and I reached out to you, and you stepped up and made a big difference. But so that's when you're vulnerable, is when you know you've hit a point where you're going to ask for help, and you hope you get it. So I'll share. That's about as far as I'll go. We can get more into that, but I reflect on that. Why, first of all, why was I pushing myself that hard? I don't need to. It's not like there was a huge financial gain. Um, but I made a promise to myself that I would push myself, or I would put myself out there to do some things that maybe I wouldn't have in the past publicly. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. But at the moment, it's a bit painful and a bit humiliating, because there's a better version of yourself. But when you put yourself out, you're stressing yourself, right? It's like we talked about earlier. It's no difference in sports. When you're going to that next level, it's harder. Everything is harder, and you fail, and you get laughed at. And that in some sick way, you enjoy burning through that, or pushing through that, but it certainly isn't fun at the time. And
You know
that's
what's
my version.
interesting, Jim? No, I appreciate
Yeah.
the vulnerability. No pun intended. But
Yeah.
but I think that from my perspective, this is interesting to me because I wasn't personally involved in your vulnerability beyond the extent that I'm a friend of yours and I care about your success and I care
Yeah.
about how you're doing, but I wasn't emotionally invested in it.
Hmm.
I was on the outside. I recognized, because you were gracious enough to ask for my help, that you needed some help. I recognized what kind of help you needed, which to me, and hopefully I interpreted this properly, was just generally speaking support,
Hmm.
mostly just being there as so that there was something other than the screen for you to stare at. And I
Hmm.
was the laurel to your Hardy.
Yeah.
I was just, maybe I did more than that, I don't know, but all I felt like I needed to do was just be there. And when you feel compelled to make a comment that's complimentary or in context, it's helpful to Jim's cause, just say what you're going to say. And I felt your ease just by being there. So I was very happy to be able to do that. But I also, since I wasn't experiencing your vulnerability, I was thinking to myself, boy, I wonder why he feels so vulnerable. He's good at this, you know? But I
Interesting.
was so far away from it. And it's so
Yeah.
different being where I was versus where you were.
Yeah. Yeah. There's some comments you made afterwards I thought were pretty insightful, about the difference between team sports and individual sports too, right?
Hmm.
And I'm a team sport guy. I wrestled, so I did some of that. I think you mentioned you had played tennis, but there are some parallels. There's some because when you have it's especially when I won the national championships, those were at a cast, right? I had supporting.
Yep.
There was 15 other players, or 14 other players on the field. So you did your role, and then they did theirs, and it works out uh, in the middle of chaos. And yeah, that's your comfort zone. So I think this applies to everything in life, right? You don't do
It
anything by
does.
yourself.
Yeah, it
Whether even if it's
does.
an individual sport, it's still your coach. There's a lot of, it's all the preparation. There's a lot more that goes into it. But I did appreciate your comment about the difference between a
Yeah,
team
you know,
sport and a
I
individual
play.
sport. Yeah.
Well, I played both, right? I played the tennis I played was up to a particular point, but it was pretty high level. And I was telling
Mhm.
you about a finals match where
Yeah.
I got out on the court and the guy that I was playing, he wasn't as good as I was, but he got everything back. And it started fucking with my head very early on in the match. And I told you what the match became, it transcended tennis. It was about how do I keep this guy out of my head? Because no matter what I do, he's going to get the shot back. So what do I do about that? And
Yeah.
then the rest of the match became a mental exercise of me
Mhm.
against myself. And I'll,
Mhm.
I'll just never forget it. I mean, I brought it up to
Yeah.
you. It hadn't been on my mind for 20 years,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Did you push through it eventually? What
I
was
did. I
the
won. I won.
You did.
Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was very, very proud of that because I always fancied myself as physically gifted, but not as mentally tough as I wanted to be. And I
Uh-huh.
showed myself that I could be mentally tough in that moment. And I remember, I'm proud of it to
Interesting.
this day. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you brought that up. I do think that this challenge, unlike again, whether sports and other, whether it's business sales and like that, this was the challenge of my abilities, my just as it said in your description, my weaknesses. I had to push through those weaknesses in order
Mm-hmm.
to get to the other side. And then once you get to the other side, it does become easier. But that resistance is part of the growth.
Yep.
And
Yep.
so yeah, so we'll see. Again, I do the final talk live in 2 weeks from today or yesterday, and
Yeah, no, I
feeling pretty good
think,
about it. Yeah.
it's presumptuous of me to say this, but I think, and I don't mean to be condescending, but I think
Mm.
over time, as this becomes something that's now in your past, a couple months from now, I think you'll be able to reflect back and say, I'm glad I did that.
Mhm.
It was a little painful in the moment, but it feels good. I feel good about the fact that I did it, almost independent of how I feel like it turned out. I'm just glad I did it. I'm glad I picked up my bag of balls and I moved forward. So
Yeah.
yeah, and
Yeah, it
my
reminds me of a quote too. Don't wish it was easier. Wish you were better. That
yeah,
that one always comes into mind. And then also, don't live with regret. Right?
yep,
If you regret
yep.
that you didn't try, that's kind of the stage that
Well,
I'm at
and
professionally.
and this thing takes on different shapes and sizes, right? And
Uh,
it's not a contest of how vulnerable or less vulnerable one might be. But I was telling you, I just completed a workbook, and it's a workbook I wrote on leadership, and I consider
mhm.
myself an expert in that space because
Yeah,
I've spent so much
you're very
time in
good at
that
it.
space,
Yeah, I've
and
seen your
and
stuff.
I'm
You're very good at it. Yeah.
it's well, thank you. It's
Mhm.
for other people to determine whether my stuff's good for them or not, but I feel
Yeah.
like I'm good at it. I feel comfortable with it. But I created this 14-page workbook called
Mhm.
12 balls that average leaders drop, like
Mhm.
dropping the ball. And
Yep.
it flowed out of me and I was done with it and I gave it to a graphic designer and I got this final product.
Nice.
Now I'm tasked with who do I give this to? Who do I sell this to? Who do I show this to?
Mhm.
And you talk about feeling vulnerable. I'm like,
Oh,
this
interesting. The
this
easy
is
part was
something.
writing it. Now pushing it out is a little more
The
vulnerable.
easiest part was writing it, right?
Interesting.
That just flowed out of me. Now I'm like, who do I want to and it's
Yeah.
amazing, Jim, because this is like the last couple of days. I've hit send on that document 5 or 6 times in the last couple of days, and every single time, right before I hit send, my little brain is going, are you sure you want to do this? What
Yeah.
if you suck? What happens if this sucks?
Yeah.
What happens
Yeah.
if this person says you suck?
Yeah.
You know? And I'm like, the likelihood of that happening is so small, but
Yeah.
it's
But
still like there's a
yeah,
megaphone in my brain,
there's
you
no
know?
doubt that voice that that conversation you're having with yourself, that voice gets louder and louder and
Oh
louder
my
as
God.
as you
It's
get ready
so,
to push. Yeah. But
he's so mean. That voice
yeah.
is so mean.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well,
But
let's go over these 5 examples of self vulnerability, and then
yeah,
we'll wrap up. So, number one? What do you got the screen up there, right?
yeah. 5 examples of self vulnerability. I'm not exactly sure where you pulled this from, but it's embracing your imperfections is number one, and that apparently is accepting that you're not perfect, and that everyone makes mistakes, and being kind to yourself despite your flaws.
Yeah.
Yeah, to me, Jim, the hardest part of this is being kind to myself.
Oh, no
I mean,
question. And I like
yeah,
this one. I put it number one because that's our tagline, right? The Imperfect Men's Club. The
yep,
imperfection is the perfection. So embracing your
yep.
imperfections is I put as number one as self vulnerability because you're right. We know we do a fucking podcast on imperfection. Why was I so having such a hard time to show my imperfect self in front of a couple thousand people probably over time? Yeah, because you don't want to show your imperfections. You don't want everybody to see your mistakes, that you're not perfect, and that
Well,
you have flaws. Yeah.
yeah, the other thing about that for me is I don't know about you, but I was raised where in a family where my father didn't like us telling people what he did for a living. We
Hmm.
didn't celebrate things that we expected we should be able to accomplish without celebration. We didn't congratulate ourselves about things that some people congratulate themselves on. So it's like, well, if the expectation is that I should be able to do this and there's no celebration at the end, then, that makes me feel different about this, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's
But being
just
kind to yourself, that's probably one of the most difficult things. I know.
I struggle big time with it. I struggle big time with it to the
Yeah.
extent that I actually have conversations with my inner critic about not
Mhm.
being such a dick to me, you know. So
All right.
uh,
Number two.
num- number two is admitting your mistakes to yourself.
Mm,
Instead of making excuses or blaming others, you acknowledge your role in the situation and take responsibility for your actions. This
mm,
is one of the most important things in my life,
mhm,
and to me, it's I use it. It's how I raise my children. It's how I handle my employees. It's how I try to live my life. It's the expectation that I lay on people that I consider friends. It's like, are you personally accountable, or are you a victim looking to blame other people or other things? I think this is so important. I
mhm.
think it's the difference between fulfillment in life and misery.
Yeah, I can agree with you more. I also have grown to appreciate people that own it, that take responsibility. I and really lose a lot of respect for people that don't, that will spend more time looking to blame others than just saying, "Hey, I could have done that better," or "I'm the reason that they went this way." It's so much easier to do business with people or just have interaction with people because you can just move on. And
We, yeah.
I don't think it comes pretty easy for me now, but maybe not when I was younger. But I do think it's a
Well,
nice personality
I
trait to
think
have.
I think the more that we hold ourselves to this standard, the easier it becomes because the results continue to populate our lives. And the other thing that strikes me, Jim, with this, and it's not just you or me, it's anybody. How do you get better if you don't take responsibility for whatever it is that's going on in your life? You
Mhm.
can't.
Yeah,
You
that's what
can't.
goes back to don't wish it was easier, wish you were better.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
yeah.
So number three is accepting your emotions. I guess this might go back a little to number one about being kind to yourself, but allowing yourself to feel and process all emotions, whether it's joy, sadness, anger, or fear, without trying to suppress or deny them. Then this is interesting to me, and it just popped into my head. One of my kids has struggled with anxiety. Actually, all three of them have. I think maybe all of us do to some level. But I remember her coming back from a therapy session where she finally found a therapist that she really liked, and she had a breakthrough of some kind, and I remember it vividly because what she said is he told me, when you feel anxiety coming on, don't run away from it,
Hmm.
face it, go right at it. Just don't deny it, don't pretend it's not there, embrace it, and go right at it. And I'm sure that means different things to different people, but it's certainly exactly what this is talking about here. Allow yourself to feel the and process the emotion. Don't avoid the emotion. And so
Mhm.
that's a psychological piece of advice that really worked well for her. And
Hmm.
it's a little bit counterintuitive, isn't it?
Oh, it very much is. It's again, it's what I experienced last week and throughout the weekend. Uh, you, and like you said, dealing with that is part of the process. It's part of the growth process as well.
Mm-hmm.
'Cause it doesn't go away on its own. That's for sure. So, all
Yeah,
right.
so number four is recognizing your limitations. That always makes me think of Clint Eastwood, a man's got to know his limitations. But it's classic, acknowledging that you don't have all the answers and that you're not good at everything, and being willing to ask for help when you need it. Well, there's a testament to you in that last few words there. Be willing to ask for help when you need it. Tell me a little bit how it, because what I got from you was, Mark, I need your help. Like, but I
That's
wasn't,
basically what I said. Yeah.
I wasn't part of the thing building up to that. What was going on? Like, what made you ask me? And what was going on while you were contemplating whether you should or shouldn't ask me?
Yeah, no, I'd be happy to answer that question because like I said, it's part of the process of pushing through it. Um, well, let me answer it through the question. Recognize your limitations. In fact, I'll share a text that I exchanged with my future daughter-in-law, and she said she had made a comment about the talk or heard something that it went pretty well. And it did go pretty well after you and I did because we did 2 days. But anyway, it was something about um, at at this stage of my life, she was complimenting me on pushing through or trying to challenge myself at this stage because I really don't not that I don't need to, but that in her opinion was something uh, worthy of doing or mentioning. And my response to her was, yeah, I think in when I was in my 30s, her age, I was more interested in proving to the world or to others of my worthiness. And the
Mm-hmm.
difference at this stage of my life, I'm I'm interested in proving worthiness to myself. That's
Mm-hmm.
the difference between a 30-year-old self and a 60-year-old self. Um, so, but part of this, your limitations is I don't want to end it by saying, okay, I'm limited and I can't do these things. So it is proving that I can go beyond where I'm at, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
challenge. So there is a lot to say for limitations, pushing through those limits because sometimes you just don't know, right? Can you push through them, or are they limitations, and you have to surrender those limitations. But I've learned is if you surround yourself with good people, there is a better version of yourself when you have a supporting cast or you feel like there's somebody there that brings the best out of you, right? And I said, shit, if I
Yeah.
can do a weekly podcast with Mark, why am I having such a hard time speaking to a screen? And
Yeah.
that's when I brought you in. And there's no question it helped. But I think we all want the world to see the best version of ourselves. And
Of course.
there's certain conditions, there's certain environments where we're our best self, and there's other environments where we're not. We just suck.
Yeah.
And so it's I'm a big believer in environment and the people that surround yourself that bring the best out of your best version of yourself out. So that's why I called
Yeah, well, yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing that. I was thinking about a couple things because I think, as you've mentioned, every time we get on the podcast, there's a certain audience that we have, and
you. Mhm.
predominantly, I would imagine, men and middle-aged men, which might be as young as 30s and as old as perhaps 70s or even older than that,
Mhm.
where we start to bump into this. Okay, I'm not a kid anymore, and my limitations they're different. They're changing. And when I think about the physical stuff that we've both done, whether it's lifting weights or running
Mhm.
or
Yep.
hitting somebody or shooting something, it's like that limitation is right in front of me. Can I finish this race? Well, the finish line's right there. I can fucking see the finish line. So all
Mhm.
I have to do is make myself get to the finish line. I can do that,
Mhm.
right? But the emotional stuff, the mental stuff, there is no visible finish line. You don't know
Mhm.
where it is.
Yeah.
You just got to keep going,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Until you're done. Well, when am I going to be done? Just
Yeah.
keep going. Shut up and just keep going. You
Yeah.
know, that's a little scarier for me.
Yeah. But let's talk about that inner voice because I do think that inner voice comes into our mind at different times of our life. Particularly, I've talked about this before, right? Or that when you're about 10 years old, your brain is developing, so it's absorbing things and seeing things. And there's the more I did some self reflection on it, as being dyslexic and reading in front of the class. Uh, and getting laughed at was
Mm-hmm.
such a humiliating process. It's become part of who I am. And so my fear of reading out loud, one, it's difficult because I'm processing so much information fast, just as being a dyslexic. But two, I am horrified. I'm fearful that to get laughed at, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I'm not very good
Mm-hmm.
at it. And these
Yeah.
are things that yeah, I mean, are embedded in my uh, inner conversation or inner yeah, most important conversation you're ever going to have is a conversation with yourself, and that's a
Yeah,
crazy
yeah.
person. You ever heard that quote?
Yeah,
It's a
no, well,
good
I
one
also
because
what I
yeah,
also heard you say is you're not very good at it, and I would disagree. I think it's probably, from my perspective, it scares the shit out of you, but you're pretty good at
well, I'll let you know in a couple of weeks, uh, but but
it.
yeah, I also think going back to what you were mentioning about you worked on that document or that paper that you were putting out.
Yep,
What I was the vulnerability was because as I shared in that talk, I'd been working on this for my entire career, 40
yep,
years.
yep,
And so there's a lot of emotion when you're sharing with the world something you've been working on for 30, 40 years. It's like my other patents. They're your babies. You don't want criticism. You're emotionally attached to the outcome. And
yep,
and that's also why I license my patents or my inventions, because somebody else could go sell them better than I can sell them. I'm too close to it. And
yep,
it's also part
yep,
of creation, right? Creating art. When you wrote that document, that didn't exist before. So you're creating something, you're bringing it to the world. It's going to get criticized, but you don't want
yep.
that criticism because you're very protective of the emotional investment that you made in that document. It's you're very sensitive at that stage and
Yeah, yeah,
sharing
yeah.
yourself. So,
Another thing that strikes me as you're talking about that, because I agree
mhm,
with you, is
mhm,
this notion of what's the difference between, what's the opposite of love? Well, it's not hate, it's apathy. It's
mhm,
like, what if I put this out there and no one gives a shit? You
mhm.
know,
Oh
like
yeah,
I'd rather people say it sucks than
yeah.
people go, oh, I didn't notice that you even sent that to me.
Would you rather say? Yeah, often have think about that, and my answer is right away to myself and now publicly is I'd rather put it out there than regret not putting it out there because
Sure.
I couldn't live with it. Since you have to put it out there. If you don't, it's easy not to put it out there and then not be criticized. That's it's kind of weak in a way if you think about it,
It
right?
is. It is. Well, that's
Of
part of the inner voice that's fighting with you.
course
Is
it
like,
is.
am
Yeah,
I a pussy, or can I get this thing,
yeah,
out there? And it's like, and when my inner voice is battling with this workbook in the last couple of days, there's two voices. One of them
yeah.
is like, who the fuck do you think you are that you can publish a document on leadership and
You mean
anyone's
FOMO?
actually,
It's a case of FOMO? Oh,
what's
not
that?
FOMO. No, no. Imposter syndrome.
Totally.
Yeah.
But there's also this other guy in there that's
Yeah.
going, you know exactly who you are and you're really good at this shit. So stop
Yes.
whining and complaining and just hit send,
Yeah.
you know?
Like I said, the most important conversation you'll ever have is with yourself, and that's a crazy person because that's crazy talk, right? You're having a conversation with yourself.
Yeah, I'm like, where's
Yeah.
my pills? Where's my
Yeah.
pills?
Yeah. It's
Well, the last one, so we don't lose track, is being
Mhm.
honest about your needs. That's number five, and
Mhm.
that one in explanation is identifying your physical, emotional, and mental needs, and being willing to prioritize them, even if it means saying no to other people.
Mm.
And I think this is also an exercise in self-awareness because as an entrepreneur, you know this as well as anybody because we're both entrepreneurs. And that is, no, you can't do anything by yourself
Yeah.
almost. You almost need someone else for just about everything. Even if it's a tiny little boost or a ride somewhere or an email, it could be
Yeah.
something very small, but if you're on an island trying to do things by yourself, you're going to get disappointed most of the time, at least in my experience. You need help.
Yeah, yeah, that's a good one. I think that the other reason that this was so difficult last week is because I consciously carved out a tremendous amount of time. Even didn't do things for the weekend, work on it. Like I was so committed not to say you didn't allocate enough time or you didn't give it enough time. I gave it all the time. I gave it all the attention, everything I could, and it still wasn't as good as I wanted it to be. So,
Yep.
but it's interesting that this one says about you're identifying everything, the mental and the emotional part. I thought I had all that right, and
Mm-hmm.
yeah, maybe we'll see what happens. But I'll share one kind of funny story too. So I did the talk, and then I went downtown, had some lunch, and saw a very good friend of mine, and he goes, "Hey, how you doing?" So he was with another friend, and we were talking, and he says, "What's going on? What's wrong?" I said, "Oh, I think I just bombed a webinar," and he laughed, and he does a lot of webinar stuff, so he definitely speaks from some authority, and he goes, "I know why," and I was like, you think he'd give me some more compassion, like he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that," and he laughed, and he goes, "No," he goes, "Oh yeah," and he goes, "I know why." I go, "Why?" And he goes, "Because they're fucking hard. Webinars are hard." I expected him to say, "Because you suck," right? Because you're horrible. And he goes, "I know why, because they're really hard, and I've done a few, and I and
Well,
yeah,
yeah, that's great. That's
wasn't it?"
what a good friend.
He's a
Yeah,
great friend,
yeah, that's
and like I said, and he's one of the number one marketers in the world for his space. So he's done a lot of stuff. It's he sits with credibility, but he
well,
doesn't say, "Oh, I'm sorry, that's too bad that you
yeah.
feel that way." He goes, "Ah, yeah, I know why it sucked, because they're hard."
Well, you know what that tells me, Jim, and we can kind of wrap up. That's a good segue. But what it tells me is an acknowledgement of what we were talking about in the pregame to some
Yeah.
extent, which is most people don't take these chances. Most people aren't willing to make themselves vulnerable. Most people,
Mhm.
I mean, what you did, and your friend just confirmed it as an expert in that field.
Yeah.
Jim, most people aren't even willing to try this shit because it's so hard. So
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
have to give ourselves credit for being vulnerable, I think.
Yeah, yeah, and even speaks to this podcast, right, Mark? I somebody asked me if they had helped them. They want to start a podcast, and I got on a Zoom call with them and shared our experiences. And first thing I said to them was, when we first started, it wasn't too good. It wasn't our best work, or at least I can speak
Yeah.
for myself. It got better and better because um, well, obviously, we trusted one another. We really tried to work on the format, and we improved it. And we improved it. And here we are, what, 70, 80 episodes.
Yeah. 80 something. Yeah.
Yeah, and that applies to everything in life, right? You just
It
don't show up the
does.
first day and hit grand slams. It just doesn't. That's not how life works. Yeah.
It isn't. It isn't. Yeah,
Mhm.
no, that's good stuff, Jim. It's good.
Yeah. All right.
Thanks for sharing the story, and thanks for asking for my help. I appreciate it.
And thank you for your help. All right, Mark. Until next week.
All right, see you, man.
See you.